Good day, ladies and gentlemen. It is the 9th of January, 2006. Today's LexCast, we're going to start out. The first story comes from WashingtonPost.com. It's about a gentleman by the name of Paul Gregory House, whose case on appeal, I guess on a habeas sort of appeal, has been accepted by the Supreme Court of the United States to decide whether or not the fact that DNA evidence, which was relied upon apparently pretty heavily during the trial, and later, after all his appeals had been exhausted, turned out to belong to the husband of the person who was murdered rather than Mr. House, whether or not that should entitle him to a new trial. Now, the claim being brought by the attorneys for Mr. House is that they want the court to rule that, with the DNA evidence and everything, that the Constitution guarantees those with a particularly strong claim of innocence a new trial. And obviously they say that the DNA evidence makes a pretty strong claim of innocence. The prosecution in the case says that that's not true. The case is strong without DNA evidence. It's not really a necessity. And if you hear, when you first read through the prosecution's evidence, it does sound pretty solid. Mr. House had told the police that he was staying at his girlfriend's house all that night. Well, his girlfriend testified that he left and came back, with a bruise on his hand. It looked like he'd been in some sort of fight or something. There was another witness that said that apparently on the next day he had seen Mr. House coming from the area where the body was found, and there were blue jeans that Mr. House had thrown away that, when tested at the lab, had the decedent's blood on them, which is all pretty strong. Of course, during closing arguments, the prosecutor relied on, and probably at the time seemed like a really good idea, pretty heavily on the fact that the semen couldn't be excluded, that it looked like it was Mr. House's semen, or, well, I'm sure they didn't say it that way, but they couldn't exclude the fact that it was Mr. House's semen. Unfortunately, a couple of years after the trial, of course, when DNA became better, well, I shouldn't say unfortunately, but unfortunately, I guess, for the prosecution, a couple of years after the trial, when DNA became better, it was found that the DNA was not House's, and that the DNA was actually the husband's. There was also other countervailing points on the evidence. The defense claims that the witness that said he saw Mr. House in the area where the dead body was found couldn't have seen him, or couldn't have easily seen and identified somebody in that area. Prosecution says that, or the defense says that apparently, and apparently this is indisputed somewhat, that at the lab, one of the vials of blood taken from the decedent was spilled, and that the blood found on the pants, or at least when tested, is more consistent with what would be from those vials than what would have been from the night of the incident. And the defense also goes through and works out and says the timeline for what this gentleman is supposed to have done, Mr. House is supposed to have done, really doesn't work. That he basically would have had to have been Superman or the Flash or something, and gotten there, done it, gotten away from his girlfriend's house, gone 2 miles, done a brutal, bloody fight, murder, and then run back in just an incredibly short period of time. And perhaps the most important thing is that 2 witnesses have come forward now, years after the case, and said that the husband came to them while he was drunk and admitted that he had killed his wife. This went to the Sixth Circuit. The Sixth Circuit, in a 8-7 decision, decided that that wasn't enough. He didn't deserve a new trial, and bounced it. rejected his claim of, I guess, actual innocence would probably be the claim, or close enough to actual innocence that he should get a new trial. The Sixth Circuit said, no, you don't have it. 8-7. Well, now the Supreme Court's taken it. And the Washington Post makes it seem like, the reason they're taking it is because, well, they're going to overturn it. And perhaps the money quote here is, and this is from the actual prosecutor in the case, Phillips, the prosecutor who put House there, concedes the Supreme Court's willingness to look into House's case after lower courts ruled against him does not bode well for the state. You'd have to say we might well have to retry this case, he said. So I guess the conventional wisdom is that the Supreme Court's taking it because it's a point where when it looks like there's a really good shot the guy is actually innocent, that after found evidence or after developed evidence should lead to a new trial at the very least. Our second story today comes from the LedgerInquirer.com, and it is from Alabama. In Alabama, there was a minister by the name of Floyd Bailey, and he was counseling two people in marriage counseling, Paris Faulkner and Jim Faulkner, and he had an affair with Paris Faulkner. In the process of having this affair, he talked Jim Faulkner out of taking a good job. Eventually, the affair comes to light. Mr. Faulkner confronts them. There's a confession. The minister loses his job at his church, and there's a divorce. The husband or ex-husband then sues the minister on a claim of some sort of tort of malfeasance in his job, in his counseling, his position as a counselor, as the minister. Alabama, in the circuit court or in the trial court, the jury gave a $1.7 million verdict to Mr. Faulkner. And of course, it goes all the way up to the Supreme Court in Alabama, and the Alabama Supreme Court rejects it. And their basic ground for rejecting it, and I actually went and looked at the case because it wasn't really in the news article, but I went and looked at the case, and their ground for rejecting it is the grounds for all these sorts of things get rejected. They say basically that it was an alienation of affection cause, and by statute in Alabama, alienation of affection is not a valid cause, and therefore they reject the case. Third story today comes from Advocate.com, and in Massachusetts, Governor Mitt Romney is introducing a bill which will force those who are accused, not found guilty, but accused of rape or sexual assault to have an HIV test if the victim requests one, or if the complaining witness requests one. All sorts of issues there, but I'll leave that to y'all. Discuss among yourselves. The next one comes from WorldNet Daily. It's not the first place I saw this item at. I did a little bit of searching around, found it on a couple of actually Israeli sites, and then I found it at WorldNet Daily. It seemed to have the biggest story on it. There are a number of other stories on it that seem to be from further back in time, but the Ninth Circuit upheld a teaching tool, let's put it that way, being used in California, where elementary school students, without their parents being told, were taught about Islam. And not just taught about Islam, they were made to experience Islam. And here's what the claims of what they did were this. For 3 weeks, impressionable 12-year-old students were, among other things, placed into Islamic city groups, took Islamic names, wore identification tags that displayed their new Islamic name and the star and crescent moon. They were handed materials that instructed them to remember Allah always so that you may prosper. Completed the Islamic 5 pillars of faith, including fasting, and memorized and recited Bismillah, or in the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. By the way, that's wrong. Bismillah is in the name of God. The entire thing should be Bismillah Rahman Rahim, which I'm not sure if they were made to memorize the entire statement. And they also wrote on banners and hung on the classroom walls. They also played jihad games during the course, which is part of the school's world history and geography program. This was taken to court by several upset parents, shockingly, and the circuit court said no deal, or actually the district court said no deal. They can teach any way they want. Apparently, just didn't uphold the parents' claims. The Ninth Circuit has now failed to uphold the parents' claims. Now, let's be a little bit straight here. WorldNet Daily is coming from a position, not an Islamic-friendly position. But let's assume even half of the things that they say happened. The schools are basically hiding behind, this is just history. We're just teaching history, and Islam is a serious part of history, which is true. However, let's put this in the realm of, say, Catholicism. Say, what would happen if we were just teaching history and Catholicism, and we started making students for 2 to 3 weeks walk around with rosaries, having a little statue of Mary around, learning the Hail Mary, doing confession, going through the sacraments, experiencing every one of the sacraments that the Catholic Church teaches exist. Do you think that the Ninth Circuit would uphold a immersion teaching of the Catholic faith, which is incredibly historically important, more historically important to American history than Islamic history is? Do you think that the Ninth Circuit would have allowed that to happen? I don't, and I seriously doubt that anyone out there who puts much thought into it believes that it would. Of course, I guess there's always a possibility this gets appealed to the Supreme Court. I doubt it, though. I think this is one of those things that dies in the circuit court. Next story comes from Scottish TV, and we find a story there where the police in Scotland, and I guess this is probably in the entire UK now, but apparently in Scotland, are trying to identify potential criminal kids while they are still toddlers and force special classes upon both them and their parents in an attempt to head them off at the pass, to keep them from being criminals in the future. I imagine there's probably, this probably doesn't cause a whole lot of problems in England, but it raises the hackles on the back of my neck. I got to tell you that. The next thing comes from thenewspaper.com, and we find here that this is a little bit on the lighter side. A gentleman by the name of George Kaiser in New Jersey went, and he was drunk, and he'd been convicted previously of driving drunk automobiles. He needed to get somewhere, and so he had bought a miniature motorcycle. The kind of things for a kid, a toddler type thing, probably a little bit older than toddler, but young kid, the kind of thing that you and I probably would associate with clowns. The little motorcycle that the clown rides on and around, behind the elephant or whatever. Thing had a top speed of 20 miles per hour. While drunk, Mr. Kaiser gets on this thing, and drives off to where he's going to do whatever he's going to do. Well, New Jersey Superior Court Judge Ernest Capicella finds him guilty of driving while under the influence, fines him $1,000, and suspends his license for 10 years. Now, pretty ridiculous result. I think we can all agree with that. Not like you can really harm many people other than yourself while doing something this stupid. I don't know New Jersey's DUI laws. I'm sure that if a prosecutor pushed this circumstance in Virginia, they could get a conviction. And I suspect it's probably the same way in New Jersey. I'm not sure the judge had a whole lot of choice here. It's just a silly case. And our final story today comes from 5WMCTV.com, television station, I think, out of Memphis. Well, they're talking about Memphis in their story, so I'm pretty sure it's a Memphis station. And this is a story about females and their involvement in crime. And WMCTV is breaking the story that females are becoming more and more involved in crime and criminal activities. And they point out that in Memphis alone, in the last year, there's been a 10% increase in criminal activity by females. Okay, nothing too shocking there. We've all seen that females have gotten a little bit mixed up in crime recently, or, well, gotten a little more mixed up in crime. Why? And they do offer you the reason as to why this is happening. The biggest contributing dynamic to women being involved in violent crime is changes in the labor force participation rates. Specifically, more and more women have gone from being housewives to being part of the workforce. That just sets up for all sorts of jokes about being, if they stayed home, no problems. It's a setup for all sorts of barefoot and pregnant jokes, but I'm going to kind of leave that alone because, well, first of all, I'm sure there's somebody out there, female, who watches this. I don't know who, and I would rather not face the consequences of that sort of statement. But I think we can all draw our own conclusions here. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to call it a day. I hope you found this informative. And next time I put something up, I hope to find things as substantive and useful. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good day.